Good morning, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Wayne State University. It's November 9th, 2012, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another version of Meet the Methodologist. As you may know, CARMA is a nonprofit research methods education center located within the School of Business. We have several different types of programs. We do offer 2.5-day short courses literally around the world. We'll be here at Wayne State for a week doing 16 of them in May, and I invite you to visit our website to find out more information about those. And our three visitors today are here participating in our CARMA Consortium Webcast program, a program through which we deliver live 1-hour lectures on research methods topics to faculty and students at universities that join our program. And in case you don't know, we have 120 universities worldwide that participate either in that webcast program or its international version. And so what we do is when we bring the speakers in to give their lectures, which will be happening this afternoon, we take advantage of the opportunity to chat with them earlier in the day, and that's what we're getting ready to do now. But before we get started on that, let me also make sure that you know that we do have a free 30-day trial membership program for that webcast program. And if you want to get in touch with us in the next hour or so, we can get you hooked up so that your school will be able to watch these live webcast lectures this afternoon, as well as have access to the 80-plus 1-hour recordings that we have in our video library to enjoy over your upcoming Thanksgiving break. But we are here for Meet the Methodologist, and so it's a real pleasure to welcome our three presenters here today. We have Ann Cunliffe, John Mathieu, and Mike McDaniel, and welcome to Motown, as I like to say, and very happy to have you here giving your lecture, and we appreciate you taking the time this morning to share your views on different things.
Thanks for having us, Larry.
Yep. So to get the ball going, how did you get interested in research methods? All three of you do work in that area, and so I'm always interested in what it is that stokes people's involvement. So, and we'll kind of go in different order. Ann, would you like to start us off?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think I've always been interested in qualitative research methods. A number of years ago when I did a Master of Philosophy degree in management, and I used shadowing, diaries, interviews, but then when I went on to do my PhD, I realized that there were other qualitative methods out there to be explored. And there are sort of many other possibilities for generating the sort of rich, thick data relating to organizational life. So sort of gradually over the years I've explored different qualitative methods, but it really began back when I was doing my MPhil, thinking about how do you try to access people's experience in organizations.
Okay. John, how about you?
It's nice to be here. Thanks for hosting us, and this is fun as well. Actually, my interest in research methods is backwards. I'm an applied psychologist. My work really did start from trying to address organizational problems. So, given that, the typical scientific mode is that we come up with hypotheses and theories and look for a venue to test them in. A lot of my questions come from what are the problems that an organization has experienced, or what are the opportunities they're trying to exploit, and then how can I help them realize that? So I get into situations where I find myself with, they've got an absence problem, they're transforming to teams, things of that sort, and you have to sort of work within that space, which means you can't come in with a predefined methodology. You can't have a single hammer that says, this is the way I'm going to always do things. So I do everything from lab studies where I want to choose a certain environment so I can really scrutinize something tightly, but I also find myself in a lot of messy designs and a lot of messy areas which require quasi-design, statistical techniques, and other sampling kinds of strategies and so forth, so that I can end up answering the question in the best way possible. So it's really an inside-out kind of approach.
Mike?
Well, I was fortunate to study with Frank Schmidt in graduate school. He taught my meta-analysis class, and I learned to appreciate the value of large amounts of data in drawing conclusions. And around that time, I was also working at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, and there were a lot of meta-analyses going on there with regard to personnel selection tests, and that helped to focus my research interests.
Okay. Related to this kind of interest in the evolution of research methods, I'm also always curious about people's graduate school experiences, and wonder whether you have a particular course that you liked a lot and you felt like that you had that had an impact on you. Mike, if you want to offer another course other than Frank's, that's okay. Or if you want to talk more about Frank's, that's okay.
I like Frank's the best, although I had many good professors and good courses. Frank's had more of an impact on me than others. Prior to going to George Washington, I had been in a applied social psychology program at Loyola University in Chicago, and I had good stats training there as well.
Yeah. John, how about you?
I was fortunate. I had a number of different good classes, and I think it was the portfolio of them that helped. I had a psychometrics class, I had a research design course, multivariate stat course, but the reality is, and this is nothing to say about my graduate program per se, it wasn't the classes. It was the experiences. It was doing projects. It was working with a variety of people. That's where the toolkit got built. It was out there actually doing things. So to be able to quickly, to understand psychometric theory, yeah, you need to know that. But the real issue is, okay, we're out and we're doing this project. Now, how do we leverage that? So most of my learning happened, good 80% of it happened outside of any kind of a class per se, and much more in terms of the colleagues that you have, who you're working with. And that was in graduate school is horizontal as much as it was anything else. I was very fortunate to go to grad school with the likes of Scott Tannenbaum and Ed Salas and a few other folks, and we did a lot of collaborative work as well as with our professors. So that's where it really happened. It's outside the classroom.
Okay. Anne?
Well, I did my PhD in England, and at that time there were no taught courses, so a PhD at that time was purely research. I always had the theory that it was to build moral fiber, because you didn't even have a reading list, you created your own. So you really had to be sort of self-disciplined in thinking about, what is it that I really want to do. But so I didn't actually do a research methods course, although my PhD supervisor, is known for writing research method books. But I think, the one thing that I guess my favourite moment, and I can still recall this, was sitting in his office one day and he said to me, "Do you know anything about postmodernism?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, go away, read a couple of articles. I think you need to know something." And this was at Lancaster University, which at that time was the hotbed of postmodernism. And of course you can't just read a couple of articles on postmodernism, not if you hope to understand it. And so that took me in a whole different direction. So, I got immersed in a different literature that I found just incredibly challenging and interesting. So, although that wasn't methods, it sort of led me into thinking about, so what methods relate to this? If you look at work from this perspective, what methods could you use, in empirical work?
Yeah, it's interesting how we, for many people, have these kind of singular moments that you look back on that you realize have had a big impact on you. In my own case, I can remember like it was yesterday, sitting in a seminar room in the spring of 1980 at the University of Louisville in a social psych research methods course, where my instructor, who was faculty, had gotten his PhD at UCLA, spent a whole class period writing Lisrel matrices on the board. And that was just a structural equation. Techniques were entering the field of psychology, and for some reason it resonated with me, and that's what I do. I'm also interested in the impact of influential books. And so I'm wondering whether you have a particularly favorite research methods book that either influenced you greatly or that you rely upon a lot? John, we'll come to the middle with you if it's okay.
Sure. I think it's a spattering of different style books, but I think, and this is, I'm going to show my age here, the Petizar and Schmelking, and there was an earlier version of just Petizar. Was a regression-based book, but what he did in the version with Schmelking, so this has to be late 80s, early 90s, is he actually tried to pull things together. So there were chapters on analytic techniques, there was chapters on quasi-experimental design, there were chapters on the general linear model, and really illustrated how all of these things come together. And if you're doing a quasi-design and you're trying to do statistical controls, how does that differ from if you're doing an experimental design and you're using more dummy coding kinds of strategies? So I was resonated to that book, and that went hand in hand with a lot of early experiences I had. As an undergraduate, I ran some subjects for a guy who was working with Dave Kenny, and we were doing quasi-experimental designs in the field. We were doing crowding research, and we were doing manipulations out there and then coming back and analyzing it with structural equation modeling, doing mediators and moderators. So, that was my first exposure as a naive undergraduate, and it was sort of pulling it all together. So any books that don't do things in isolation, I think people ought to gravitate towards. So you need to understand how measurement works in the context that you're using it, not in an isolation and in a vacuum.
Anne?
I think a couple of books. One of them has to be John Van Manen's Tales of the Field. That was just so mind-blowing when I first read it, and started to think about what is our role as a researcher in the research. And the tales that we tell are very different. And I think that book had a major impact internationally. And in fact, the very first Qualitative Research Methods conference I ran in 2008, John was the keynote speaker because it was to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Tales of the Field. And then the second book is John Schotter's Conversational Realities, which is not a methodology book, but what that did was really engaged me with this whole idea of social constructionism and thinking about the nature of social reality differently. And again, what impact does that have when we're doing our research, when we're doing our empirical work? And so, that again, is a difficult, challenging book, but a very thought-provoking one.
John and Ann mentioned Dave McKinney and John Van Manen. I'm, in case you don't know, very happy to say that they are past Webcast contributors, and if you're interested in seeing what they presented here, you can access them if you're a member, or you can get to them through the trial membership that I mentioned earlier. Mike, what about you?
Well, I still have my copy of Campbell and Stanley, which was a classic. I think I have all editions of the Cohen and Cohen book now at Cohen and Cohen, Aiken and West. It's more of a data analysis book than a statistics book. It helps you through that. Those are my favorite non-meta-analysis books.
Yeah. I think for those of you that are at the earlier stages of your career, including graduate students that may be watching this, I do encourage you to keep those books because once you've been in the field and you get to look back, and they have a special meaning to you, the classics.
Yeah, let me echo in. I've got a book, SIAP put together a series, I think it was SIAP, like in the very early 80s. And Larry James and Stan Mulek had a book on causal analysis. There's a little orange thing about it. It is totally tattered. It has duct tape on it, and I go back to that all the time. That was just the epitome of how do you think about this. Now, subsequently, you go out there right now, you get one of the books that's a nice tutorial and has all the software links in there. But that was how do you think about causal analysis from a structural equation modeling, and so it's 82, I think. So what is that, 30 years? Wow.
No, I absolutely agree. It turns out I think I've got all the copies my original books that these guys have mentioned, but and that's what it's a special treat when these people come and present, and I take them to my office and I say, look, I still have your book.
I have
And they wish you bought another copy.
I have a copy of the Hayes Stat Research Design book. The binding's undone, and it's held together with rubber bands.
Well, one of the advantages of having distinguished people such as what we have at the panel here is that they've got a lot of experience as reviewers of papers, of action editors for papers, and I just was wondering if I could get you to comment on some of the more typical problems or limitations of the papers that you review, and that can be either in terms of the methods or of the theory. Mike?
Sure. I review a lot for the Journal of Intelligence, that's simply called Intelligence, and there's a lot of regression analyses in there, and people are often trying to interpret their beta weights as what's the most important variable rather than doing a dominance analysis. And I learned about dominance analysis in a CARMA talk.
Yeah. Thank you, James LeBreton.
In the organizational sciences, I often get meta-analyses to review, and there's very little attention to publication bias. There's very little attention to sensitivity analyses. And this concerns me because meta-analyses often direct research areas. They identify what we know, what we still don't know, and if they get things wrong, it's very bad for the field. So I'll be talking about that later today in my talk.
Okay, John?
Sure. I tend to work in the team space, and I do a lot of multi-level research. So in the reviewing area, I end up getting a lot of those sorts of papers. And we've hit a dangerous point in time where doing multi-level analysis is a point-and-click kind of environment. So people are enamored by doing the analysis and don't necessarily think through as concretely and as well what is it that they're analyzing. So you see an awful lot of, I can aggregate this, so I do. So you get a lot of disconnects between what the measure is, what the concept is, and how they're using it in an analysis, and they're trying to, resurrect some insight from the analysis that was never there back in the design stage. So one of the things that I'll be harping on a lot in my hour today is having a line of sight between what is it that you're really trying to answer, and what really are these concepts, and have you operationalized and indexed them at the proper level of analysis, brought together all the right sorts of supporting evidence for that. And it's not the same in every multi-level study. It depends on the nature of the variable. So having that connections and seeing that line of sight, I think, is very critical. And when I see the fatal flaws, the killer fatal flaws, it's usually when there was a major disconnect along those lines.
Yeah, Ann?
I think, sort of building on your idea of the line of sight, I would say coherence. And that's something that I'll be talking about this afternoon too. But
we're all doing promos here.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
With the that you can see with the 30-day trial program.
Do you work for PBS on the side here?
But by coherence, I mean, are you walking the talk? So are you doing what you're claiming to do? And does that run through the whole study? I get a lot of papers to look at, to review, or PhD theses to examine that sort of start a social constructionist perspective on. And if that's what you're claiming, then does that run through the whole of the work? And so I think that's important. And it's interesting that often it doesn't. So sometimes I think people don't fully understand what it means, what the implications are for methodology, and for the way that you've theorized your work.
An important audience for CARMA are graduate students and doctoral students, and so I'm wondering whether you would like to take this opportunity to offer some particular words of wisdom related to doctoral students and things that they can do that will increase their chances of success? Mike?
Well, I would seek out the most productive research folks in your department and work with them. I would decide to be interested in what they're interested in, because you can get more done that way. You can always have your own interests, but if you're working with someone who already knows the literature, your life is a lot easier. I would try to get 2 or 3 research projects at the same time, because some get delayed. You can't get subjects until 3 months from now. One's tied up in a human subjects review committee. One, something's wrong with the data and you have to take some time to explore it. So if you have 2 or 3 projects going on, you pretty much always have something to work on. I mean, I've known students who had whiteboards with 30 projects on them, and one of them manages to get through them all, but I think that's less common. 2 or 3 should do it.
John?
There's all sorts of mentoring conversations here, so I'll go specifically onto the research methods and sort of learning a trade on that. I certainly would echo everything Mike just said, but I think there's a couple of things. One is you gather certain basic information in classes, but that's just a foundation. Certainly you hook up with somebody who is out there doing it, so that you can learn from them. Whatever it is that she's doing, if she's very good at it, you can learn that from her. Before you make that leap, decide who you are. And it's a little hard to do that at times, but do you really like to do laboratory research, or do you like to do field research, or do you like to do ethnographic research? Figure out who you are. You're going to hear all the platitudes about you should sample everything and do everything, and the reality is you don't have that many hours in a day. So at least early on is figure out what really is your sweet spot. What is it that you like to do? Who does that well? Okay, and align yourself with them. Go do some of the fast start kinds of things. And yes, I will sound like a promo here, but CARMA has wonderful things. There's PDWs at various conferences. There's workshops that you can go to in a variety of places. Go do a deep dive on those. If you want to learn dynamic network analyses, take the plunge, do a week-long intensive study someplace. But when you get out, go do it. Actually, go do the research, because that's when you're really learning. So later on you can kind of broaden your portfolio and work with different people and learn different kinds of techniques. But immerse yourself, figure out who you are, and then immerse yourself, and I'd suggest those are the ways to do it.
Okay. Ann?
Yeah, I would say that the figuring out who you are is really important. And to think about what is it that you want to do. What is it that you feel passionate about that's going to sustain you really for the next 5 to 10 years? I think that's important. I think it requires passion. I think it requires persistence. Because it's not easy, being a researcher and learning the craft of research. I think it's about finding your own voice in the research as well. So what is it that you want to say? And having a sort of research agenda with some general themes. I sort of find that sometimes people have a very narrow research agenda. It's sort of on one specific small area. And then you have sort of people who have this very wide one and do whatever comes up at the time. But I think if you can figure out what are the threads that run through your research agenda that are going to interest you, whatever type of research you're going to do, that sort of gives you some coherence. I mean, I think that's the way you figure out who you are and what your voice is going to be in the academy.
Yeah. We've talked about the process of publishing from a couple of different perspectives, but you have different types of experiences with the different journals that you've worked with, and I'm wondering if you have any ideas on things that journals could do that might improve the quality of our science. Mike, would you like to start out with that?
Sure. I think our organizational science journals and our psychology journals need to start acting like medical journals. I wouldn't say often, but frequently journal editors or reviewers will engage in suggestions to you that amount to harking to hypothesizing after the results are known. They're going, well, yeah, that one hypothesis didn't work out, but consider this perspective. So they're feeding you hypotheses that match your data. I also think our journals need to permit supplemental information on the journal's website. So they might want you to cut the paper down by 5 pages, but in the process, you're losing a lot of information. If there is space on the internet for 10 million cat videos, there's space on the internet for 10 pages of supplemental information. I think our field
Just nailed the takeaway line from this session.
There we go. Journals need to start, or journals or fields need to start research registries. So people who are planning a study, conducting a study, or have already completed a study are registered. This keeps studies from getting lost and suppressed. Most of the major medical journals will not accept articles to review unless they have been pre-registered in a registry. And I also think our journal should consider requirements to release the data from the studies, perhaps after a few years, in case the authors who spent a lot of time collecting the data want to pull another study or two out of it on a different topic, presumably. But we need to have our data released. If you know your data is going to be released, you're going to be a lot more careful in your data analysis. You're going to be a lot more careful about reporting all the effect sizes and that are important for the area and sticking them in the paper and not just deleting the ones that hurt your storyline.
Okay. John or Ann, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I mean, my experience is sort of slightly different because I'm not a psych person, and I'd like to put in a plug for my journal,
Please
which
do.
I'm editor, as soon as we're doing publicity, which is Management Learning, and one of our philosophy is to publish work that is scholarly and thought-provoking. And so one of the issues that I have, particularly in relation to methodology, is that we're not always open to innovative methodologies that can give us a different way of thinking about organizational life, some aspect of organizational life. And so we sort of deliberately seek those types of articles. And just to give you one example, we published a paper where somebody was using Japanese rengas, which is a form of poetry, to encourage critical reflection. And so I think we need to be sort of far more open to those issues in journals. I think we can sort of have an impact and expand science by being innovative.
John?
I want to just echo in on both points here because I think we're really at a tipping point right now. We do have this thing called the internet, and you can do amazing things with it. And the journal showing up in your mailbox is got a very short history, probably about as long as buying music on CDs. It will come to an end very soon. In fact, the Academy of Management is launching their new journal discoveries on the web. And it's not just for cost issues and not killing trees, it's so that you can enable different kinds of delivery systems and change the way in which journals really operate. So I think there's going to be an opening. In the next 10 years, I think our journals will transform in terms of what they are. But if you're trying to publish today, journals are also very differentiated. There are your gold standard journals that are out there, and yes, if you want to slug through promotion and tenure kinds of cases, you have to be there. But there are other ones where there are more niche journals that either look for particular methodologies or topics or so forth, that if we can open up a little bit on the PTR side of things, and I'm talking to any administrator who might be listening, all right, those sorts of things should be valued because it enables people to do more innovative, different things than what the gold standards are necessarily stamping out in terms of every particular study. So with that, as an author, particularly if you're new in the field, talk to the more senior colleagues that you have, because with the proliferation of journals, all right, the Academy of Management Journal is a different animal than the Journal of Applied Psychology, which is a different animal than organizational behavior and human decision processes. So the meta theme I didn't even realize I was going to get to on this talk is think about who you are, what it is that you like to do, and then where are the places where that's a welcome kind of work. And try to target those initially in terms of the way in which you do it and the way in which you package things.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, Ann and John and Mike are here to give their webcast lectures this afternoon. I was wondering if you could briefly kind of summarize the origins of it and what it is you're going to be talking about. Mike?
Sure. I'm going to be talking about sensitivity analysis in the context of meta-analysis. And sensitivity analyses are analyses to see what happens to your results and conclusions when you alter the data or alter the analysis methods. Then I'm going to be arguing that we don't do that very much and we need to do it a lot more. And the primary sensitivity analysis approach that I'm going to be discussing in depth will be publication bias, the organizational sciences journals, and most of the psychology journals are just awful in terms of, maybe that was too strong. They have challenges in the area of publication bias, and to some extent the journals promote publication bias by not wanting to publish statistically non-significant effects even when the rest of the paper was very well done. So that's my talk.
Okay. John?
As a student, as a faculty member, as an administrator, I've often been faced with the challenge of what's the order in which you teach things? Do you teach stat first and then measurement and then design, or do you teach design first and then stat? And the answer is there is no good sequence because they all have to be learned together because they all work in a synergistic fashion. That's going to be my talk. I'm going to use the particular area of teams, which happens to be a sandbox I like to play in. It's ripe for multi-level kinds of phenomenon, and it's one where if you're a teams researcher, you have to confront am I going to orchestrate the entire research enterprise to be able to answer some question of interest. So I'm going to try to put all the pieces together.
Ann?
Okay, and the theme that runs through my talk will be validity in qualitative research. And what does that look like? It actually sort of emerged, I guess, in two ways. One was that I got fed up being rejected from journals because the qualitative research methods I was using were not valid or generalizable. And my answer is no, they're not, because that's not what I'm doing. And so I got interested in, okay, so what does validity look like when you're, from different perspectives? And I think to answer that question, we have to go back to our meta-theoretical assumptions. And so validity is about being coherent and consistent within the paradigm or the problematic that you're working within. And it also arose because my PhD students would say to me, I'd really like to do qualitative research, but it won't be valid, will it? And so I said, yes, it will. You've got to think about validity in different ways. And they said, well, write a paper on it. And I said, okay.
To close things out, one of the things that also interests me greatly is how it is that people sustain a pattern of effort and excellence for a prolonged period during their career, as all three of you have. And so I'm wondering whether there's anything that you do that draws inspiration or provides you with motivation to continue doing the work that you've been doing. John, you'd like to start us out?
Sure. I try to help real world problems. So you get out there and you find out what the real challenges are. All right, and you try to help people with that. You try to cultivate and mentor good graduate students. I mean, that's why we're in this profession, is to do that. And you partner a lot with people. You partner with people who can bring things to the table that either you can't or it would be very onerous to do. I partner with a lot of consulting firms, applied research places, where I get access, I get data, I get opportunities, so that I'm not out there as a consultant. I can actually stay in sort of my comfort zone in what I do well, and then partner in with other sorts of folks. So those are the three things I do.
Ann?
I think find your community. So I think you need a community of people, you know, that not necessarily that you think in the same way, but that you can discuss ideas with, that you may differ on, and sort of talk about what those differences might be. I think it's creating a space for people to come together who have those interesting ideas, and that might be through journal editorship, but also through the Qualitative Research Methods Conference that I run. And I think thirdly, I go back to New Mexico because I just love New Mexico, and you know, I find the landscape inspiring.
Yeah. Mike?
Find good colleagues. Find colleagues who will push you to get things done sooner than you would get them done by yourself. Marry someone in your field so that you can have someone who understands what you're doing and they can provide you feedback. Find good doctoral students and nurture them and make them work a lot.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and reflections this morning, as well as making the trip here to do your webcast lecture. Again, let me remind you that you can find more information about CARMA on our website at carmawayne.edu, and also, in case you're not aware, we also have a YouTube channel, and you can find the link to that YouTube channel on the CARMA website, in which you'll find past recordings of Meet the Methodologist sessions. And let me also remind you of our free 30-day trial program and our video library program. Information about that is also on our website. Alex and Hansu, thank you for all you do. Thank you guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.